I came up with this thing called Rapid Knowledge Assimilation. Obviously, I've bastardized various bits and bobs I've learned in the Air Force and all that sort of stuff. But what I see with... the reason I did this is that obviously, we all look at the world, we see the TV, the news, we meet random people with, different ways of thinking. And I'm always shocked at how little information a random person will have before they come to a very solid opinion, belief, or conclusion. And they'll stand and they'll die on their sword, and we see this with every topic. Any topic you can think of, someone will have very little understanding or knowledge or data or facts or something. They'll come to some uninformed conclusion and they will fight to the death to defend their opinion because they believe that, shifting their opinion or even opening their mind to a different way of thinking is losing, when in fact it's not, it's growth. So I am the biggest advocate of changing your mind. I really do think that, and as I say all the time, your opinions should be written in sand, not titanium. So it's not loss of face if you flip your opinion. I think it's just open-minded growth. So I see that as a trait in people, not a fallback. So the core tenets, I guess, to rapid knowledge assimilation is: what data and information do you have at the various depths of that topic? So, and I think the Earth is a good example. Inner, outer core, mantle, upper, etc. And it's not just the the layers of basalt below us, but we then have the atmospheres. So most people, if you were to take this picture here, most people have random facts and figures or things, headlines that they've seen in an article, and that's basically them in the exosphere. And if you dig down a bit, you then get into the thermosphere, etc., etc. And it's really when you're only an expert, a proper expert in something, that you get into the crust, the upper mantle, etc. And then, people that have spent their whole entire lives dedicated to one particular subject, they're the only people that really understand the inner and outer core of the topic. And so I came up with some things. So it's like, okay, well, what is the topic or subject or silo that you're aiming to grasp some sort of handle on? And then also you have to, so random knowledge accumulation is a bit haphazard unless you have a desired goal, because otherwise it's a bit of a scattergun approach. Whereas if you have a designated question that you're trying to answer, it helps with your research and info gathering. So what is the desired goal? What are you trying to find out? And what is the purpose for that deep dive? So the first level, which I guess is the exosphere, is, explore the media narratives first. Because there was a saying in officers training is that Air Force officers, a good Air Force officer should always read two newspapers, the Sun newspaper and the Times. So, and it was a bit of a derogatory term, but basically read the Sun newspaper so you know what the squaddies are thinking and what your troops are thinking, and then read something of substance so you actually know what's going on. In hindsight here, both the Sun newspaper and the Times are total bollocks, but yeah. So explore the media narratives, because that's what the general populace are thinking. What is the mainstream thought seesaw? So they'll have, there are various pivots or fulcrums that the public will fall into. They'll, whether it's politics, so you have far left, far right, and then, the centre. There's not many people in the centre these days. I think the centre is a good place to start with any topic. But yeah, so what is that seesaw? It could be anything from, Ukraine war. Who's at fault here? Who's the boogeyman? Is it Russia or is it NATO? Again, you'll have people on both sides of the seesaw. So then you've got to go into what is the current mainstream science / experts thinking. Now, and this is important. The wording here is very specific. Mainstream science. Now, I used to think science was science. And unfortunately, that's not the case these days. You have scientists which are completely owned and bought for and funded by government organizations or private organizations with a specific narrative in mind. And then you have scientists that are, or the opposite, that have very little funding, have zero agendas, etc. And unfortunately, it's those that are funded by, the World Economic Forum or the US or whatever, that gets mainstream media coverage. And anyone, that says the other, they're instantly labeled as, kooky pseudoscientists or whatnot. So it's very hard. I think these days, as tech gets more prevalent, and we got to get AI now, like finding the unfunded scientists, I think is going to get even harder and harder. So this is why I do love what Elon's doing with Twitter, because he's turning it into that digital town square with zero censorship to a degree. So people can have some sort of platform. Anyway, now when you then get to this other sort of seesaw, you need to find out, what are the diehards thinking on a particular topic, and is there new data? And you have to always cleanse your mind of opinions when you're looking at new data. And a good question I ask myself is, what data or information would I need to completely flip my thoughts on something? I did this with a flat earther, I don't know, half a year ago or something. This guy, I have to say, is a raving idiot. But I didn't. But I was being I was the most diplomatic I could ever be. I didn't share my opinion at all. I didn't even tell him I'm a pilot, and like all that sort of stuff. Because I always find it funny how there's very, very few, if any, pilots that are flat earthers, because if you understand how to do navigation at long distances, you'll know that you have to account for the curvature. So anyway, I was being completely anonymous in my thoughts and whatever. And one of the questions I was sort of building up to is going, okay, so it's interesting, blah 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 blah. What data, what information would you need to prove to yourself that the Earth was an oblate spheroid? And the answer was very telling, because it stumped him. He couldn't answer it at all. And then I had to sort of prompt him. I was like, well, what if we got some random uni student who's good at rockets and put a camera up in that rocket, so he wasn't funded by someone, and you watched him build it and then sent it into space, and then you watched the GoPro footage. Would that convince you? And then he came back with something like, no, because GoPro's in it as well. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. There's no helping this person. He seemed to think that the whole GoPro organization made every camera they've ever made had some sort of fisheye lens, so everything looked curved. And I was like, yeah, I had to check out that conversation at that point. Anyway, moving on. So, once you got all the sort of the surface level stuff, identify the power, influence, and money trail. So who has what to lose, or who has what to gain? That's always very telling. In fact, you can look for that. You could put that question right at the very top, and then you'll figure out the truth. 9 times out of 10, who has the most money and power to gain from whatever, and that is normally the answer. Then everything else makes sense, because a lot of things don't make sense until you find out that question. Using data, form your own reasoned opinion. And when I say reasoned opinion, this is not, 15 minutes of Googling. This is, a good 10 hours worth of looking into something. And by the way, I spend at least 10 hours researching any random bits and bobs. I once came across, I probably spent 10 hours looking at flat Earth, thinking, wait, check yourself before you wreck yourself. What am I missing here? Only to realise that was 10 hours completely wasted. But I do 10 hours of anything. Hell, I've spent 10 hours researching the Titanic and other stuff which we just take for granted as history. Anyway, and then you've got to stress test your stance with anticipated rebuttals. So if you think, oranges are vegetables, whatever, and you, after your own 10 hours plus, and you've come to a reasoned opinion, and your weird opinion is oranges are vegetables, well, stress test it. Come up, obviously people will give you random questions based on, like, how can you answer it? Do you sound like an idiot when you're answering it? If it's solid, yay. If it's not, if it's flimsy, then you need to revisit the previous steps until it's solid. So this, in a nutshell, is my RKA, Rapid Knowledge Assimilation. Now, and over time, obviously, you'll, like with anything, you'll become a natural at doing this, and you can speed up your process. These days, I just go straight to the identify, power, influence, money trail. That normally answers most things, but it's worth going through the process. And so obviously words make it look a bit crazy, or not crazy, but hard to understand. So I'm a picture person as well. So the way I look at it is that it's a big tree with roots. So when you put it side by side, you need to approach any topic with open and honest naivety. So obviously the topic or subject or the silo of information is this, this tree. So first of all, explore the media narratives. They will be the leaves of the tree. The mainstream thought seesaw will be the small twigs. Mainstream experts, I guess, will be the branches. And then you go all the way down, and with any topic, there's an incredible amount of roots that come with it. Because sometimes you need other information, other knowledge to be able to understand what you're trying to understand. Like, for example, my kids asked the other day, Daddy, why is the sky blue? And I know the answer, but I couldn't figure out a way to answer them because they didn't have the prerequisite knowledge. For example, they didn't understand refraction, the refraction of light. So I was trying to come up with a way to explain it to them without them understanding what refraction is and the angle of incidence, all that sort of stuff. And so it's really hard. So sometimes you can try and explain something to someone and it'll go completely over their head because they just don't have the prerequisite knowledge to even understand the answer. Just like I've said the other day, I think it's really hard to fully explain the value potential of Casper if they don't understand what crypto is, full stop. Because first of all, to really understand why Casper is so crazy, as in crazy good, you first need to understand why Bitcoin is so amazingly good. Like, in a nutshell, the main, that I think, if you're to try and boil it down to the single most important reason why Bitcoin is the future, and why it's so important, is because the chronic global expansion of the currency supply. Done. That is literally probably the most important thing to know. Banks and governments will always print ad infinitum. Therefore, you need hard money that is deflationary. That's all you need to know. And when you fully understand that, you realize, shit, Bitcoin is deflationary, or in real world terms, and that the banks and the central banks are actually going to be the things that propel it in price. And obviously there's a few other bits and bobs that you need to understand, and the more you understand, the more bullish you'll get on Bitcoin in the long term. But how do you explain, the benefits of Casper to someone that doesn't understand what crypto is? Like, if I was to boil down the single reason why Casper is so bullish, it's because it is the only proof of work layer 1 that makes every other layer 1 and layer 2 and layer 3 completely obsolete. And again, that if you don't understand that, that is all that you don't need necessarily smart contracts or all the other bits, all the frilly stuff. That is the override. That is the only main thing you need to know. It makes every layer 1 and layer 2 completely obsolete when it eventually reaches its full purpose. Anyway, moving on. So now, here's the thing. When I first did this was presented in the cuddle of March 2020. And this was literally as we all used to call it, the corona pandemic was emerging. So obviously, in the run-up to this cuddle, I approached Corona with this whole rapid knowledge assimilation thing, because I'm not a biologist, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I went through my own thought process to try and come to a reasoned opinion on something. And guess what? My reasoned opinion now is 180% degrees different than what it was back then. It's interesting, isn't it? Because new data emerged as time progressed. So forgive my slides, but I'm going to cringe as I show some of this. But first of all, when I approached this to begin with, I had to go back to the basics. What is a virus? Like, really, what is it? Most people think, oh, it's like a tiny organism, smaller than bacteria, that does bad stuff to you. Well, not necessarily. You get good viruses and bad viruses. Anyway, so I went back to, proper germ theory. I even questioned germ theory in itself. So what is a virus? How does it affect a cell? Are they always bad? How does it reproduce? How quickly does it reproduce? How do you kill it? How does it transmit? I went through all of that before I even tackled the next bit. So I need to get the core trunk of the understanding. I had to understand exponent maths, basic SARS-CoV-2 stats. Oh, there's a random O there for some reason. How does it affect humans? All that sort of stuff. Then I had to go through, the second, third order power, where's the money trail, all that sort of stuff. Mainstream thought seesaw, etc., etc. And then, only then could I go to the leaves of something. And most people do this in a reverse way. Because you have to start with the roots first, because if you fully understand the roots, when you come to the leaves and all the media and social media, you'll have a better bullshit detector. Whereas most people start with the social media without that bullshit detector, and then they're more easily swayed. So I approached that, and yeah, so thank God I didn't actually put my, yeah, that's good. So let's leave it there. But long story short, over the last 3 years, more data has made itself evident, and I've completely changed the way I think about it. And I think that is, in my own opinion, I think having mental plasticity and a willingness to be completely flexible in a mental position, I think that's a good thing to try and develop. So that's rapid knowledge assimilation. And the thing is, you can apply rapid knowledge assimilation to wealth generation, which is exactly what I did like 10 plus years ago. I was like, how can I do all of this into wealth? And I came up with, this. I'm not gonna, I'm gonna speed through this because you heard all of this in the WAP if you've done the WAP videos. But first of all, I needed to, what is your monetary goal and ideal monthly net cash flow, and the time frame you want to achieve that, i.e. your A and B numbers. What's your average net worth required, as in what's the CAGR that you need to achieve your A and B numbers, assuming you're going to spend the first 3 years dicking around spinning your wheels in the mud. And then once you know what CAGR you need to hit, what assets can realistically achieve that CAGR? Now, if you're like me and I had a ridiculous CAGR and I needed to hit 50+% per year every year, I quickly realised stocks can't do that, property can't do that, mutual funds can't do that, premium bonds can't do that, a job definitely can't do that, because the average salary increase per year is what, 2-3%? And yeah, so I was like, oh shit, business / investing is the only way that I could achieve my CAGR. And if you're brutally honest with your own CAGRs, I think you will most likely come to the same conclusions. But obviously, for me, back in the day, I was like, right, I've got 10 grand, I want to get to 10 million in the shortest period possible. So obviously the CAGR was crazy. So then I came to the conclusion, okay, business and trading, business / investing. So they were my silos. I then had to rapid knowledge assimilate into those silos. I then had to assign activities to achieve the CAGR within those silos. Then you had to do some mapping and planning and yearly course corrections, because we all overestimate what we can do in a year, but massively underestimate what we can do in 5 years. And even greatly, oh my god, that's bad English, even more so, underestimate what we can do in 10 years. So then, point 8, you then need to aggressively, unwaveringly acquire the assets that you highlighted in your previous planning. And then eventually hit the goal, relish the feeling, have a glass of Prosecco, and party maybe. And then you need to obviously set up assets that conservatively maintain your A number. Your A number, by the way, if you can't remember, is your ideal monthly cash flow. Because it's actually a lot easier to get your ignore me. And then 11, when you have all of the mental strains and weights of monetary problems lifted off your shoulders once you've hit your A and B numbers, you like I've seen with a lot of people that do well in business, they get bored and slightly depressed because they've in most cases they've sold a business, they've made got 10 million, they've just put it in the bank, bought some properties, they've put it in stocks, they've spread it around as much as possible to protect their wealth. But because they've now got no business that they've spent 10 years trying to build up, they're searching for a cause, they're searching for something to do. And so in my opinion, once you hit a certain wealth threshold, let's say it's 12 mil plus, for me, I've always thought if you had a net worth of 12 million and had access to say 5 mil liquid, if you ever needed to, you can live like pretty much any billionaire. Having that net worth doesn't really get you much extra than a billionaire does. Yes, you can hire the yachts if you want to, but you don't need to buy a yacht. Remember the old saying, if it flies, floats, or fornicates, rent it. Obviously, use a different word for fornicate, but so positive mass change vehicles. What I mean by that is, only then can you really start to help other people properly. If you want to go and plant 10 million trees, you can do that once you're in that position. So create positive mass change. So this is, in a nutshell, in my opinion, the most efficient way to attack the wealth generation journey. And obviously, you can go into each one. Here we go. This is a good picture. This is from one of my old diaries. I nearly always, I don't know if you can see, I went for a while. I went digital, but I've always got one of these big black A4 notepads. I think for 2 years I went digital, with the random moleskin digital things and iPads. I can't do it. I have to have a physical thing, and I've always got the same one. I don't know. I think it's from Tesco's or something. 10 quid. And if you, let's get back to the screen. And this is what I wrote down a long time ago. I did, rapid knowledge assimilation. I figured in order to hit my B number, what sort of person, the question was, what sort of person do you need to be to hit your numbers, right? And then I realized, okay, business owner, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what required skills, niches, or knowledge does one need to achieve to then be that person? And then I wrote this down. I know it's a simple list, but it took me a long time to come up with that list. So the first of all, let's get my Zoom note doodle. You need a basic growth mindset. Like, you can't achieve any of this stuff unless you have that. And then I needed to sort my own personal finances out because they're in fact, they're still a mess. It's ironic. I've got all the stuff in the WAP and stuff, but I've always like my own personal finances is actually a bit of a clusterfuck. But yeah, it's only half a day exercise to tidy it all up. Basic life planning, basic money knowledge, basic investing knowledge, basic property knowledge. It was actually when I got into basic property knowledge I quickly realized it wasn't for me. Basic tech future landscape opportunities. A good example is that I was around 2015 I thought I need to insulate myself so if something really bad happens in the world, we're hit as least as possible, which is why some people said I foolishly went into too many different types of business, but I wanted, I guess, diversification in business. And then when COVID hit, we weren't affected really. Some businesses died, some businesses did all right. So this is why, Simple, quick life hacks. Yeah, deep goal, blah blah blah. Yeah, most of this is business, networking, all that sort of stuff. How to do better in business. But then there's stuff here which I still haven't got to yet. So personally, again, so this is where, so raising capital, IPOs and ICOs. Spend a fair bit of time in doing M&A. That's a big step up in business, because it's a lot easier to grow via M&A than than not. Like, for example, like Steve had a single accounting firm, and I remember chatting with him months ago. I was like, so how many customers do you have? And he was like, X amount. And I was like, well, how long would it take to double the amount of customers? And how much money would it cost to get those customers? Yada yada. And how many staff would you need to double your customers? All that sort of stuff. And then where I was getting to is like, well, you could actually just go and buy another accounting firm and achieve those numbers way quicker and do it in space of 6 months instead of 5 years. And so guess what? Steve did it. He's an action taker. So recently, Steve bought another accounting firm and doubled his customer numbers. The things I haven't got round to yet, and it'll probably be a while, is this charity structuring. I've looked into it a little bit, but I've realised very quickly that charity structuring is just a fancy way of extreme tax avoidance. And being able to control sums of money which are technically not yours, but you still control it. Which is why, guess what, every billionaire and every really, centimillionaire, etc., has their own foundation. It's a way to offset tax egregiously and still control it. Bill Gates and the Melinda Gates Foundation, or Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He says, oh, I donated everything to charity. Has he really? Anyway.